For decades, families tossed old war pistols and forgotten hunting rifles into closets, never guessing some would explode in value. The story was routine. Surplus Lugers once sold for pocket change, Colt revolvers bought as cheap workhorses, even rare Winchesters left to rust or were turned in for scrap. Then the market changed, local buybacks erased thousands, surviving supply vanished, and prices soared. So how did yesterday's junk become today's jackpot? The answer begins with a flood no one saw drying up. Cargo ships once unloaded crates of surplus rifles by the ton onto American docks. After World War II, government warehouses overflowed with everything from German Lugers to British Enfields, all headed for the civilian market. Sporting goods catalogs advertised these guns for prices that now seem impossible. A Luger for under $50, an M1 carbine for less than the cost of a new bicycle. Dealers stacked racks with surplus pistols, sometimes offering a choice of country or era, as if picking out a pair of shoes. Families snapped up these bargains, not for history's sake, but for weekend plinking or to stash in a closet, just in case. Old catalogs from the 1950s and 1960s show pages of surplus arms with handwritten markdowns and bold closeout stamps. Gun shops treated these imports like tools, marked down, tossed in bins, or bundled with a box of ammunition for a few extra dollars. For decades, the idea that any of these could be valuable never crossed most people's minds. They were just cheap, plentiful, and everywhere, fading quietly into closets, basements, and attics across the country. On October 22, 1968, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Gun Control Act into law. Overnight, the flow of cheap military surplus guns into the United States slowed to a trickle. The law's new rules, especially the sporting purposes test, blocked imports of most military rifles and pistols. For decades, American dealers had relied on endless shipments of Mausers, Lugers, Enfields, and dozens of other surplus models. Suddenly, those crates stopped arriving. By the end of 1969, federal records show that military surplus imports had dropped by more than 80% compared to just 2 years before. Shelves that once overflowed with bargain rifles and pistols began to empty. Dealers scrambled to adapt, with some left holding unsellable inventory, and others shifted their focus to domestic antiques and whatever pre-ban stock they could find. The trade press called it the end of an era. Collectors and historians now point to this moment as the turning point, the day when yesterday's junk started its slow climb toward treasure. From this point on, every attic find, every bringback, and every forgotten closet gun became a little rarer and a lot more interesting to anyone searching for a piece of the past. A battered wooden footlocker sat untouched in a Michigan attic for decades, its contents long forgotten by the family. When the lid finally creaked open, inside was a faded canvas holster and, nestled within, a German Luger PG-8 pistol. Alongside it, a stack of yellowed papers, one stamped War Department, and another with a handwritten note from 1945. The story traced back to a grandfather who had served in Europe during World War II, bringing home the Luger as a souvenir, complete with official capture papers. For years, the pistol gathered dust, dismissed as a relic with no practical use. But when the family decided to have it appraised, the story took a sharp turn. Auction records from 2024 show that this very Luger, with its matching holster, magazines, and provenance, hammered at $15,000, far beyond what anyone expected. The appraiser said, "Provenance is everything. You could have a rough Luger, but with original papers and a wartime story, collectors line up." Even the wear on the grip and the faded ink on the capture papers added to its appeal. This was not just a gun. It was a piece of living history, complete with the fingerprints of the past. For the family, what started as a forgotten attic find became a life-changing windfall, and a reminder that sometimes the most valuable things are the ones nobody thought to look at twice. Collectors and appraisers don't just look at the gun, they look at the story it can prove. Value hinges on a handful of details that can multiply a price or cut it in half. Originality matters. A firearm with matching serial numbers on all major parts stands out. Swapped barrels, replaced grips, or refinished metal might look cleaner, but they erase history and slash collector interest. Accessories tell their own tale. A wartime holster, original magazines, or capture papers can double or even triple the final hammer price, especially if they are tied to a specific person or unit. Provenance. Any document or photo linking the gun to its past acts as a force multiplier. Auction records show that even a rough Luger with a GI's name and papers can outpace a mint example stripped of its story. Condition still counts, but honest wear from use often beats a gun that has been polished or restored. Scarcity drives prices. Fewer surviving examples, whether lost to scrap drives, buybacks, or careless cleanouts, mean higher demand for what remains. The penalty for missing proof is real. Guns with mismatched parts or missing history often languish at the low end of the market, while complete documented examples spark bidding wars. Before anyone rushes to trade in, turn over, or clean out a family heirloom, pause and check for those hidden details. Sometimes a faded piece of paper or a scuffed leather holster is the difference between a common keepsake and a small fortune. In the 1980s, a Colt Python could be found in a used gun case for about $300, sometimes less if the finish was worn or the box was missing. Dealers treated them like any other secondhand revolver, barely glancing at the coiled snake roll mark as they scribbled a price tag. But as the years passed, the Python's reputation grew. Magazine articles praised its smooth trigger and perfect timing. Hollywood took notice, putting the Python in the hands of heroes and villains on the big screen. By the 2000s, collectors started chasing the legend. Auction listings in 2025 show ordinary Pythons, no rare finish, no celebrity owner, selling for $4,000 to $8,000. Pristine examples with boxes and paperwork routinely reached $10,000 or more. The record for a rare variant hit nearly $49,000 at auction. What changed was not just scarcity, but the way nostalgia and reputation fueled a rush. The same gun that once sat ignored on a pawn shop shelf now draws bidding wars and headlines, all because time turned a common tool into a collector's prize. Original factory records for pre-war Smith & Wesson revolvers showed just how limited their production could be. Some variants rolled off the line in numbers that barely cracked 4 digits, and many more were lost through police trade-ins, wartime scrap drives, or simple neglect. Surviving examples with matching serial numbers, correct grips, and untouched finishes are the ones collectors chase. A factory letter tying a revolver to a specific shipment or agency can add thousands to the price. For Winchester lever actions, especially the famous Model 94, the phrase pre-1964 gets thrown around like a magic ticket. But the real value is not in the date alone, it is in the details. Factory ledgers reveal that some pre-1964 variants are genuinely rare, while others were made by the tens of thousands. Condition, originality, and special features like rare barrel lengths or custom sights are what drive prices into the stratosphere. A beat-up pre-1964 with swapped parts might fetch little more than a later model, while a pristine example with all original features and documented history can spark a bidding war. Collector checklists always start with the facts. Factory records, matching numbers, and honest wear matter far more than slogans or myths. Every year, families unknowingly discard objects that later sell at auction for 5-figure sums, because the value of history is not always obvious. As collector demand rises and surviving examples vanish, the true cost of forgetting grows. What's left behind tells our story, if we care enough to look. Share your family's finds in the comments.